Hello dear students, you are welcome in this video. Dear students, as you know, we are making videos on IKS, means Indian Knowledge System, and this is the next video in the same series. And in this video, we are going to talk about overview of Indian education and educational institutions. So it's very clear topic here today we have taken. What we are going to do in this video, we will talk about the uh, history of Indian education system and institutions, educational institutions which were established in India, and what is the scene of Indian education today, and how different types of policies have impact on Indian education, right from the school education to the higher education and the research. So let's dive into the video and understand how Indian education system is transformed over the years. Here, first we'll talk about the Indian education and what we are going to cover the history of Indian education. And here I have taken this statement from the book which you saw on the very first slide. Here, the history of Indian education and educational institutions is rich and varied, reflecting the country's diverse cultural and intellectual heritage. Now, what you understand by this statement, we understand here, you see, it's a very rich and varied history. So, we have a very rich history of Indian education in India, and it depicts or reflects the diverse cultural and intellectual heritage. So, we'll talk about the Vedic period, and before that how Indian education was and how it has been shaped now. So I hope you got the idea of this statement. Now let's start with the ancient period, and in ancient period particularly we are looking for Vedic period, which spans from 1500 BCE to 500 BCE. BCE means before Common Era, means before Christ, 1500 to uh, before Christ 500. So this is the period. In this period we understand, or we came to know, that there was Gurukula systems, and oral traditions were very prominent. And in those days, as we know that India has a great tradition of Guru Shishya, or master pupil, and in the same fashion we have this Gurukula system where all the pupils or students go and they learnt and they took knowledge from their gurus. So this system is very strong in India in the ancient period. Also, we have oral traditions, and we find that in oral traditions we have knowledge from old generation to new generation, and this transmission is particularly made by reciting the hymns, reciting the poems, or reciting the knowledge, whatever there in the whatever form that knowledge was available, and it was transmitted from one generation to the next generation, or the another generation. And we find the knowledge came to us through oral tradition, because India has a very strong tradition of this transmission of knowledge. So we know that many of things from our old generation, though it may be in the form of stories, it may be in the form of epic retelling, it may be in the form of hymns or other kind of literature. Now again, so through these traditions we have a very vibrant system of education in India in ancient period. In the next period, that is post Vedic, which spans from 500 BCE to 1200 CE. CE means Common Era, means 500 before Christ to 1200 Christ, or Common Era. So in this particular era we find the basic influence of Buddhist and Jain texts, or Jain culture, or Jain religion on all the knowledge, or the perceived knowledge in that period. And in the same period we find that the great universities of India were established. For example, we had Nalanda, Takshashila, Vikramshila and Vallabhi. Now Nalanda was established in 5th century, and it is one of the renowned center of learning in those days. And we find that many scholars came from other countries to learn or to get knowledge in Nalanda University. So these are some of the famous universities which were established in post-Vedic period, means after Vedas, where we have Buddhist and Jain influence very prominent on all these universities and the learning environment, because it was the center of learning in those days, means post-Vedic period. Now let's move to the next period, and that is medieval period. and in medieval period it is spanned from 1200 Christ to 1700 common in our CE. And in this particular period we find Islamic influence, particularly because India was invaded by Islam, and Islamic kings or Islamic settlers settled here, and they started new centers of learning. For example, we have madrasas and maktabs in those days, and in these madrasas and maktabs, they taught Islamic studies, languages, for example, Arabic and Persian. So, this was the scene of learning at that time. Then, there we also find sciences, and such type of centers were established in Delhi, Jaunpur, and Bidar in South India. So these were very prominent centers of learning where we find Arabic and Persian languages were taught, and also science, mathematics were studied there. In the same era, we have Sanskrit and regional languages. In the same period, we find that the patronage to Sanskrit and regional languages were extended, and we had the university like Mithila University and the institutions in South India which were focused on Tamil, Kannada, and Telugu literature. So, these were some of the prominent branches of literature in those days. For example, Tamil literature, Kannada literature, and also we have Telugu literature. Mithila University was known for that, the study of all these literatures in South India. Now let's move to the third important phase in Indian education system. Here we have colonial period, which spans from 1757 to 1947, means till India's independence. And in this particular period, we have a vast impact of British education on Indian education system, and still we find that impact is continued in today's era also. So British educational policies we had in those days, for example, schools and colleges were established by East India Company, and we also find that the Christian missionaries also established schools and colleges here in India. That was the prominent influence, or that was the prominent impact on Indian education system, because the British education system has completely changed the scene of learning in India. And there were some of the acts or policies made by Britishers to impart education to India or Indian people. For example, we have Act in 1813, which allowed or which permitted Christian missionaries to establish schools and colleges in India. So, through this act, we find that the Christian missionaries had given permission to work here in India, especially in the field of education. And still, we find some of the missionary schools in India, in all the parts of India. Founded by these Christian missionaries. Then we had prominent change in Indian education with Macaulay's Minute, which was presented in 1835, where English education was made prominent. Or we find that basically English education has been started with Macaulay's Minutes in 1835. So there were some recommendations that the Indian should give an English education. Particularly English was made the language of instruction in 1835. Then we had next policy, or Wood's Dispatch. In Wood's Dispatch, which was presented in 1854, which recommended the establishment of universities at Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. So in 1857, all these three universities were established in India, and these universities had a greater role in shaping Indian higher education system. So University of Bombay, now it's called as University of Mumbai, then University of Madras, and University of Calcutta, which were established in 1857. So this was the scene in colonial period or in the British period. Then apart from this Britishers, we also had some initiatives by Indian leaders and Indian social reformers. And here some of the institutions which were started by or founded by these visionary leaders include, for example, here we have Allahabad University, which was founded in 1887, then Banaras Hindu University in 1916. Then we have Aligarh Muslim University, which was founded in 1875 by Sir Syed Ahmad. Now, this university is particularly founded to impart modern education to Muslims. But now we find that this university has a very prominent place in Indian education, particularly in higher education. Then we have Jamia Millia Islamia, founded in 1920 by nationalist leaders. There were so many nationalist leaders and reformers who started these educational institutions in India, and still we find these institutions are working great to reform Indian education system. Then we have Vishwa Bharati, which was founded by the great Rabindranath Tagore at Niketan in 1927, and it is one of the prominent universities today, Vishwa Bharati at Shantiniketan, and it has become the hub of higher education. So, this was the scene of Indian education system in colonial period, and in the same we find that the establishment of IITs and IIMs also was a very prominent before the independence and after the independence. So, we find that after independence, IIT Kharagpur was founded in 1951, then IIT Bombay 1958, then we have IIT Madras in 1959, then we have IIT Kanpur 1959, IIT Delhi 1961, then IIM Calcutta founded in 1961, then IIM Ahmedabad 1961, IIM Bangalore 1973, IIT Goa 2016, and IIM Mumbai. Actually, it was converted in IIM in 2013. So these institutions also have a very great role in expansion of Indian higher education and quality education. So all these institutions are known for the quality institutions and imparting quality education to Indian masses or Indian students. So this is very important. Actually, this is after independence, means 1947. After 1947, all these institutions were established and they started imparting quality education to Indian students. Now, let's see the post-independence scene. What is there in after 1947 to present day? So there were so many educational policies introduced during these years after India got independence in 1947. So the higher education, not only higher education, but the school education, adult education, and higher education got expansion after 1947. So we find that expansion of education, primary education, adult education, vocational training, etc. Now, vocational training was a very important part after 1947, because most of the students were made skilled by this vocational training, and hence these IITs and IIMs were established, and students got vocational training there. Now we also have very popular 5-year plans, and in those 5-year plans we find that education has given a very prominent place, and there was some amount which was kept for education in these 5-year plans. So this has great role in shaping Indian education. Now let's understand some of the key policies during those days, or after 1947 or after independence. So we have basic three education policy in those days. For example, we have 1968 National Policy on Education, in which the expansion of education is made available not only for the upper strata of the society, but also for lower strata. So expansion of education was a prime aim of the National Policy on Education in 1968. Actually, there was a commission set in 1964, which is called Kothari Commission. Kothari Commission gave its report in 1966, and in 1968 this National Policy on Education is framed, and the expansion of education was made through this policy. Then we have 1986 National Policy on Education, and in this particular policy the emphasis was given on technology. So this policy is known as the technology, introduction of technology in education. Then the same policy is modified in 1992, when we adopted open door policy in India, and National Policy on Education was modified at that time, and students made we can say that skilled, they were turned into skilled laborers according to this policy. And now we have National Education Policy 2020, which is a milestone in Indian higher education system. Why? Because it has made so many drastic changes in the learning, and this policy also have a greater emphasis on digital education, online education, introduction of technology in education, and vocational training. Skill courses are started in this policy. So this policy, National Education Policy 2020, is also one of the important policies after India got independence in 1947. So this course we are learning only because we have national education policy 2020, because this policy has introduced so many courses. For example, IKS is the product of NEP 2020. Then SEC, skill enhancement course, also is the product of national education policy. Then we have generic elective, product of the same, and there are so many courses which were introduced through this policy. So this is, we can say that, the scene of higher education system in India. So I hope you got the idea of the overview of, or the historical chronology of higher education institutions in India and higher education. If you have any problem, any query, you can comment below in the comment section. We'll understand and we'll try to solve your queries. Thank you very much. Let's meet in the next video.